Let's talk Tony Maserati's Mixbus today. If you know who Tony is, you already know. The list is crazy, the amount of people he's worked with. And a lot of them, I never even knew he did the mix, and it's absolutely insane. Like, I'll give you some examples. Going down this list is just such a throwback and pretty amazing. The album Harlem World with Mace, he did that, mixed the album. Notorious B.I.G., Life After Death, he mixed it. David Bowie, Black Tie White Noise in 93, he produced it and mixed it. CNC Music Factory, do you remember? Like, it's just, I didn't realize his career spanned so far back. You know, the album Gonna Make You Sweat, he was the engineer on that album. Whitney Houston in 87, he was the assistant engineer. So it's cool watching this progress from, a lot of things where he was engineering and assistant engineering to then mixing. It just goes to tons of, that became his forte. And we're talking about, this list is crazy. Like Ricky Martin, Mary J. Blige, Jessica Simpson, Brian McKnight, Angie Stone, Alicia Keys, Sean Paul, Queen Latifah, Mark Anthony, Christina Aguilera, Black Eyed Peas, R. Kelly, Mary J. Blige, Kelly Clarkson, Johnny Lang, Jessica Simpson again, Beyonce, Usher, the Pussycat Dolls. That's a funny one. The guy, more David Bowie, Talib Kweli, Macy Gray, Jordan Sparks, Jason Mraz, Britney Spears. It's crazy. Chris Brown, Robin Thicke. The list goes on and on. This is actually kind of insane. It's nuts. He did the Daughtry album. He did Ariana Grande, Backstreet Boys, Santana. Notice what else is going on here. He's all over the place in terms of what he can do. He's not only been responsible for shaping the sound of hip hop and R&B for the most part, but, he's also responsible for doing a ton of, rock stuff in the stuff he's done with Bowie and Weezer. Anyway, I saw him mixing a song for a band called Foster the People. He's not somebody, it sounds like, who uses the same thing on his Mixbus all the time. He will change up the Mixbus depending on the song and what he's going for. So in this case, it sounds like he works like he'll build the entire mix and then decide if the Mixbus needs any help, like does it need any massaging? But he's got nothing on the Mixbus while he's working. But he does have two versions, one that he prints with no limiter on it and one that he prints with a limiter on it. And on his Mixbus, talk about simple. Like, let's just show you what he's got good here. Check this out. This is like, you'll have a whole bunch of stuff in the mix. Now, another big tip that you're going to get from Tony is so many of the tracks in the session he was working on have nothing on them at all. He doesn't put a plug-in on everything. If there's like 4, 5, 6 claps or 2, 3 claps and some duplicate, like he's got an EQ on one of them, maybe, sometimes 2, and then the rest have nothing on them. There'll be tons of tracks in the session that have nothing on them. And sometimes he'll throw a Pro Q3 or, Neve 1081 he seemed to like a lot. Different, sounds like EQs, the 31102, which is another Neve plugin, but like a lot of EQ first thinking. And the big concept about the way he works is he'll get his ideas out by like just using them and implementing them on one pass of maybe the verse. And then he'll put in the comments so he can remember to later go back. So he's looking at comments before he prints his version, because what he'll often do is just on the first verse, automate the vocal, for example, or automate the bass to make it the right volume. Then he'll paste it into the other spots in the song, but he'll put in the comments, automated the first by hand, look at the others. So he'll basically note in his mind, he wants to go fine tune the stuff he pasted in and make sure it works, but he doesn't spend time beating his brain up on one spot and then the next spot, and then the next spot, because in doing that, he'll forget his ideas. So he just gets the idea out, puts in the comments what he needs to go back and fine tune, and he keeps moving. This gets him through quick. He will work where he'll get it done as quick as he can in a couple hours, and send that off and see if he's going in the right direction, what the general comments are, knowing he's then going to make another version, send that off. And I believe he made 3 or 4 versions of this song. And it was all sort of, he'll send it off and hear back, send it off and hear back. And every time the mix revisions would come back, they'd be less and less. But what I noticed he did also is, even though there was like one revision, make this thing a little louder, he still took it upon himself to reevaluate what he had given the artist, which is a really delicate game to play after you've sent them stuff, and change more things. But the benefit of working the way he does, which is primarily in the box, he does use some, he has like a Neve console he'll send all his drums to, and then like a Chandler mini mixer thing he'll send the rest of the mix to. So like drums and bass go to this Neve console thing that then he uses kind of like, like a summing box, but he's using multiple things. The Chandler mini mixer thing, then that Neve console, all combined to get back into the computer. And they all, like, he prints through a Lavery. So I believe it's the Lavery Gold. I'm not positive on that. He didn't show it, or I didn't see it. But I could tell you that his print says Lavery on the track. So I'm sure it's coming back in. Everything comes in through the Lavery. Now, what he's got Mixbus wise, let's talk about that. On his Mixbus, when he was mixing the track for the majority of the song, it was literally going through just a Pro L2, a FabFilter Pro L2, with the gain increased like 2.5 dB. That was what was on for the majority of him mixing the song. He decided he need a little more something. We need to massage this a little bit more on the Mixbus to get a little more out of it. So once the mix was pretty much in a position where he liked it, then he decided that. And then what he did was he took his Mixbus track, and that had nothing on it. We have a clean, dry Mixbus with no processing. He then duplicated that, so he has a parallel of his Mixbus that he's putting some processing on. Now, what's he putting on? The BrainWorks thing that I've mentioned many times is V3, and it's, if you notice, it's on a lot of guys' stuff. The bottom line is 142% was what he was doing with the stereo width, and that's all he was doing. He wasn't doing anything else anywhere. I was like, that's pretty cool. So he just used this plugin for the widener, and other guys have mentioned how great the widener is on this plugin too. So it's obviously pretty cool. Then he would hit an insert. So he had a hardware insert of this, and it's a Great Waves plugin if you don't have it already, but it's part of the Abbey Road package, the RS124. He actually says that the characteristic about this that he likes is that it's a relatively slow, this is the way he described it, relatively slow attack and release. Now, you never actually get to see the exact settings he has up on it, so it's kind of hard to determine whether he meant he's setting this thing relatively slow or that the innate character of this compressor is relatively slow, which is true, and in which case he may have been setting it fast, but it still might have that characteristic of relatively slow, which is maybe what he was saying. It's kind of hard to interpret exactly what he meant by that, but I could tell you from me using this for, I've used this on several mixes. I love this compressor because it adds a lot of character, especially when you use the old school settings. So like this, if I'm not mistaken, this is more the new stuff. But like if you go to the Greg Wells Mixbus and you hit the old school, you see how the color of the whole thing changes and everything. This is more the old school flavor, because there were different versions of this made, basically. The original hardware sounded different than the newer version. So they give you both in this one plugin by having the choice here. And it's really dictated over here with this Cutter or Studio. So, the Studio's the newer one, the Cutter's the older one. He's using 2 hardware units that are basically 2 mono compressors. So what I think people should try also is you could use this in stereo, but you should also try it in multi-mono and see if you prefer that. So instead of multi-channel, just find the same plugin in the multi-mono. And, compression in multi-mono is very interesting because Andrew Sheps talks about this all the time, and like it's something that he really likes, multi-mono and parallel. mainly because if something like crazy is happening on the left side and it will cause the compressor to duck, if you're in stereo, if you have a stereo compressor, it'll duck both sides. Whereas if you have something happening crazy on the left and you have it in multi-mono, it'll duck the left one and it really won't duck the right one. So sometimes you get this perceived increased width because things are different happening left and right side. So that's something worth thinking about if you're going to mess with, you don't always have to go stereo. Sometimes multi-mono is the way. And when I think of how he's using it with it's two individual units, it's always kind of multi-mono. Even if he, has them set the same way, they're always going to sort of, especially in hardware, they're going to react sort of slightly differently all the time. I have a hard time believing the serial numbers are like one apart and they sound exactly the same. So, that's how I look at that. Now, the way to do the routing for this kind of thing, okay, he's got his whole mix bus being sent, let's say bus 1 and 2 is what we'll call mix bus, and mix bus parallel can also get 1 and 2. So in other words, everything gets in our mix bus with nothing on it, and our mix bus parallel with that Brainworks Digital V3 and this Abbey Road compressor, the 124. The whole mix goes down to both of these. He's actually lowered about 11.2 dB. He's lowered the parallel, so it's not as loud as the mix bus with nothing on it. He'll take both of these, and you see how they both go out bus 3, 4? So he'll put a master on the channel, so he can control volume a little bit hotter or cold, if he needs a little less or a little more on a master fader, right? But what you'll notice is these two are combined, and on his master, he'll put like ozone, the vintage limiter was his thing. Now, on the ozone limiter, something I found particularly unique that he did, well, not really, but he has he has it set on the tube mode, and he has his threshold at negative 0.2 and his ceiling at negative 0.1. So, a lot of times I don't get super into the settings, but on something like, where does he have his limiter set? I find a lot of people are always curious about that stuff. So thought I'd throw it in. His character is at 2.0 on there. Now, I don't own ozone, so that's how I'm going to show you guys that exists on the master. So that's on his master fader thing here. Now that, okay, is just his safety so that nothing's hitting the true peak. And basically, bus 3-4 from these two, Mixbus and Mixbus Parallel, are all going into two places. So the print track, it all feeds into this. That's why bus 3-4 is the input here on the print track. So this is why this is in input monitoring. I'm just kind of noting that he's probably recording at the same time two different things, very similar to like how Baines works and a lot of different guys work, where they basically have a limited and an unlimited version. So this one up here is the print track with no limiter on it. And when I say no limiter, I mean no limiter adding gain to it to bring the level up the way a mastering engineer kind of would. He's printing one without that he'll send off to mastering, and then one with it that everyone can use as a reference to listen to kind of get an idea of what a mastering engineer would do, but that's going to come off before it goes to mastering. So one of them that's being printed right here, bus 3-4, captures the mix, and then nothing's on it. He sends this out, bus 5-6. I'm just, to make it easy, we're going in order. Bus 5-6 gets picked up on this stereo bus below it, and then he's adding this Pro L2, okay? So this is how he chooses to do it. You could do it differently. There's always 100,000 ways to do things. So this is just how he's doing it. So I figured I'd show you exactly that. Pro L2 is on this track. It's actually on the bus. And then from there, that feeds a second track that's being printed. And that's the one with, obviously, the limiter because it's been picked up by right here and winds up here. So he's printing this. He's printing this, both of these, okay? Now, he's monitoring through this one, and that's why his clarity exists. Clarity is the thing like I have, which sits on my desk. So you get your PAZ telling you what the how hot you're hitting it, your LUFS metering, and just gives you a nice graph of everything you need to see. So that exists for him on his limited track, and this is the one he's most likely monitoring the mix through, because he sort of wants to get the idea of what it's going to sound like after it's been mastered. So this is the one he's monitoring through. But I'm sure he could flip back and forth if he wanted to check what it sounds like without the limiter, or compare it and try different limiters or whatever. But like I said, this is the part that goes for mastering. It gets thrown away, and he's just sending this track. But listening through the mix through here and wanting to know how loud he's hitting everything here, because that's the one that has the clarity on it. Something else being printed. So it's this track and this track, and the only thing being added is the limiter. Over here on the master, it doesn't show up, but Ozone is sitting here with his vintage, the vintage limiter I just showed you before. And the mix feeds into two places, Mixbus Parrot and Mixbus. So I found this to be very telling for a lot of reasons. When you get a guy who's worked with so many huge artists, so many, and they are doing so little on their Mixbus, it really, really, really makes me want to do as little as possible. It makes me want to mix every song with the thought of, how little can I do on the Mixbus? Let's get the track to sound as great as possible, and then add some stuff to the Mixbus if needed at the end, and different on each song. That kind of a mindset. It's very different than the way a lot of people work, who always have a similar thing on their Mixbus, and they'll always they turn on their smiley face EQ, they turn on a few things like just to give them that little boost or lift towards the end, it's just a totally different way to work. And I love it. I'm really starting to become a fan of way less on my Mixbus than I ever was before. So, and I think it's part of a cyclical process in a way, where when I started mixing in the box, the first thing I did was be like, this doesn't sound like my hybrid style that I love so much. Let's add stuff. Maybe that's not enough. Let's add more stuff. Maybe I gotta need these plugins. Let's try this. And I just would wind up like filling up the whole list. Every slot would be filled, and now it's like I've backed it off so much where I'm so conscious of anything I add there, and not liking. I really am starting to appreciate the less I put there, what the mix winds up sounding like. So keep that in mind, and also keep in mind the part about every track doesn't need something, because that was huge. He was going through things and automating stuff with the thought process of, in the verses, we got to be quieter so that the choruses have a lift. I guarantee you his mental process is always, is there a lift in the chorus? Is this the kind of song that needs that? And if so, in order to achieve the lift, we must lower things prior to the chorus. He's lowering the kick drum a bit prior to the chorus. It comes up 2 to 3 dB in the chorus. You get what I'm saying? He's lowering the bass a little bit, and then when the chorus hits, he's making it a little bit louder. He's doing things like, deciding how many claps are on this song, and they're every beat, and he's taking them off of certain beats to have them make more impact when they're there. So not only is he making mix decisions that are, mainly EQ based, like he did add, decapitator here and there. He added certain things, but on the bass track, he's just pulled up a 1081, made some tweaks to push some mid-range, cut out 47 hertz and below, and he's done. And then it was about level. I found that really interesting. He's also one of these guys who's big into cutting out problematic frequencies, especially on the vocal, especially anything harsh around 3K. So he's going in and Pro Q3, pulling it up, boosting some areas, cutting out. That seemed to be, if he had a go-to for anything, it was that. And then for when adding, this needs a little more weight, this is too thin, it needs more weight, he'd pull up a flavor EQ. So the Pro Q3, being very transparent and colorless, is great for removal, because you could be more surgical. And he was also a fan of dynamic EQ. So he's not only using, the Pro Q3 for the EQ, he's also using it for the dynamic EQ part of it. Flavor EQs the rest of the time. So flavor EQ, like Neve, pick a Neve, any Neve kind of thing. He didn't pull up API anything once, but that's another flavor EQ that I like a lot. So the flavor EQs are really helpful for boosts. And that's showed up clear as day in what he's doing. And because he's been around so long, I'm sure that's what he's used to also is if we're boosting, might as well use something that has some good flavor. If we're cutting, let's get surgical, Pro Q3, something along those lines. So he also used the EQ7 band a couple times. So the generic Pro Tools EQ for some mainly cuts, you know. He pulled up he liked the DBX for his compressor on some individual drum stuff. It's a compressor a lot of guys like on percussive elements because it can do a spitty thing where you maintain a lot of the punch, even though it does control the dynamic range. You still maintain some cut, some punch. So if you're not familiar with the DBX, like 160, check that out. If you come up with an idea where like, ooh, this would be good if let's just automate this thing. If it's taking you a while, just do it to one section, then put in the comments you got to do that later. Because at least that way you'll get out all your ideas that hit you quick on those first couple listens. You'll get to work those. You'll get to massage the thing into place with big moves, big steps, before you then get really fine-tuned and picayune about the little stuff and making everything perfect. You know, especially like just finishing an idea from front to back is not necessary. You can go back for that. You just need to get the idea out and then put something in the comments so you know what you got to go back to. I found that helpful, and that's not something I typically would do. A lot of times I would follow an idea all the way through, and you do lose your train of thought. You lose some ideas. You'll hear 10 things you want to fix during that time, and you won't remember them by the time you're done with this one idea. I'm fascinated with Mixbuses and how these top guys work. Questions, answers, anything, throw it in the comments. I appreciate it. Hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. You know what time it is. Everybody keep in mind, there's a lot more than one way to do a Mixbus. Probably a million ways, maybe more. You guys got this. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. Take it easy.